A listener note, this story contains adult content and language. If you're listening to this podcast, you might want to go back and start at episode 1. This is a story being told in chronological order. You might miss some details or context that are pretty important to the story. From Exclave Media, this is The Sicario Effect.
Se busca a Pablo Escobar. Recompensa 2,700.
Con John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez. ¿Usted por qué se entrega de nuevo a la justicia?
Porque no le debo nada a la...
A Colombian hired killer known as Popeye has been released from prison.
Hola guerreras y guerreros, yo soy su amigo John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez, conocido como Popeye.
Alias Popeye, mi señor.
Yo soy John Jairo Velázquez Vázquez Popeye,
Episode 17, Controlling the Narrative.
Un gran español, mi general Vergillos, me pidió un favor a mí de que hiciera un video promocionando un hermoso pueblo de España, Carboneras, que queda en Almería, España.
The audio you're hearing is from a video posted on Popeye's YouTube page. It's a personal message from Popeye to a man named Pascual Diaz. Diaz is the counselor of tourism for Carboneras, a small town located in southern Spain. Diaz posted the video to his Facebook page, as well as on the town's Facebook page. While the connection or reason for posting this video is unclear, it appears that Popeye is promoting tourism in the small Spanish town known for its fishing and beaches. The following day, on May 1st, Pascual Diaz posted another video message from Popeye on his Facebook account. While the first video message from Popeye left people scratching their heads as to why the former sicario for the Medellin cartel would be promoting tourism in a small town in southern Spain, the second video raised even more eyebrows. In this video, addressed to Pascual, Popeye congratulates the Murcia Ultras on their 10-year anniversary.
Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, y en compañía de mi amigo el general Vergillos, quiero enviarte todo mi cariño y respeto. Mi guerrero Pascual sobreviví a las guerras de Pablo Escobar, sobreviví a mis guerras, sobreviví a los enemigos de Pablo Escobar y sobreviví a mis enemigos. Y sobreviví a 23 años, 3 meses en las prisiones más duras de la República de Colombia. Inclusive Pascual, habiendo guerra entre la misma prisión entre paramilitares colombianos y guerrilleros colombianos. Mi guerrero
The
Pascual...
Murcia Ultras is a right-wing fan club supporting Real Murcia, a football or soccer team that plays in Spain's second division. The Murcia Ultras have publicly expressed sympathy for Nazi ideology and other related radical movements of the extreme right. In the video, Popeye refers to the group as brave warriors and enthusiastically proclaims, "You are great patriots, you are great Spaniards, and great fighters." According to several newspapers in Spain, the Spanish Civil Guard has identified them as the most violent radical group on the football scene. Several of its members, who have publicly proclaimed themselves as National Socialists, have been accused of serious crimes, including brute force assault. Popeye finishes his message with, "Keep fighting. As Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria did, and as I do for you, the club will return to its place of honor, and thank you very much for the great support you give me." The town councilor, Pascual Diaz, eventually took down the videos after public outcry. Despite Popeye identifying himself as Pablo's most trusted sicario, Diaz claimed that he wasn't aware of Popeye's past and that he would do more research in the future before selecting individuals to promote his town. In his statement to reporters, he explained how the videos came about. "I have a friendship with his lawyer since he was a child, and through him, we asked him for the videos. It was something private, but people started asking me to share it. In fact, more than 700 people have already shared it, and through its dissemination, we have made people aware of the famous red shrimp from Carboneras to more than 186,000 people in 3 days. We have made free publicity for the municipality. I'm left with that," says Diaz. He later published an apology on Facebook. "I apologize for the impact and significance that the videos have had. At no time have I thought that this controversy could happen and could harm my people and my party." This is a phone call with my producer, Matt Olson. It was recorded on May 7th, 2018. Okay, so I need to figure out a way to wind this show down. You know, so at this point, well, it certainly would have been dramatic if Popeye had been sent back to jail, or even some kind of official proceeding filed against him. You know, it's pretty clear that it isn't happening. I mean, look. December, January, February, March, April. It's now May.
With all the stuff you've been through and all the stuff you learned, did you really think he was going to go back?
I thought, I thought that was a genuine possibility for a while. that was my naivete. I think I was looking at it through the lens of, someone from the U.S. And, because if there's someone like him here with his past and then being released and caught at a party raided by the FBI, I mean, I think the chances he would be back in jail would be 100%. Not 75, not 95, but 100%. And sadly, as we've learned, Colombia works very differently. So I think I'm sad for the people who suffered. I'm sad for the victims of narco violence, but even more than that, is that the narrative is just getting stronger. And that's something, I think that's something that's really going to hurt Colombia. It's dangerous.
Yeah. It's sad. It's what it is.
Yeah. I know this is very unconventional, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you're Colombian. I'm American. You're Colombian. Do you have any questions that you want to ask him?
Well, I would like to know how. I mean, you've been very keen on the questions about the past. I would like to know more about his perspective on the present, because he's, as you said before, he's responsible. So I would like to know.
Sí, mira, cuando el coronel Hugo Chávez hace 17 años se lanzó como una figura salvadora de Venezuela.
When Hugo Chavez took power in Venezuela, at that time the country was being run by a lot of crooked politicians, which is basically the situation now in Colombia. So the same way as Hugo Chavez did it in Venezuela 17 years ago, that might have happened now in Colombia with the head of the FARC running as president. I mean, people in Colombia will see him as a savior for the country, as a savior against all the crooked politicians in the country now. But, I mean, it will be, what John Jairo says is that there will be a terrible situation, because imagine these people who used to be in the guerrilla group now having power over the country and having control of all the oil Colombia produces.
The man asking the question to Popeye is Daniel Uria. Many episodes ago, I briefly mentioned that my translator, Alejandro, brought his friend Daniel along to help out during the interview with Popeye. As it turned out, Daniel was a big help, and not just in the interview. The day after interviewing Popeye, I took Alejandro and Daniel out to dinner. They shared their personal feelings about the interview with Popeye. It was very insightful to hear their thoughts. During the course of our dinner, Daniel expressed his commitment to help change Medellin for the better. Months after, I found myself reflecting back to our conversation that night regarding the future of the city and the many challenges it faces. There was something Daniel said that stuck with me to this day. The one thing that has been a constant for generations of Colombians is conflict. As a result, the real currency that's emerged is the narrative. Controlling the narrative is the future. In many ways, at the core of Popeye is a narrative. The question is, what narrative will emerge and influence generations? And how will the world deal with it? It's a slippery slope when individuals and organizations are willing to overlook the past or examine history, but instead use a dangerous narrative as a way to promote their own agenda. As I try to adjust to the idea that there is no happy ending or resolution to this story, I reached out to Daniel to share with him some of the things I've learned and get his viewpoints. We spoke over the phone. It was raining that day, and you can hear it in the background.
I work as an advisor. Okay. I think that's a better word. Advisor for the city councilman, a very young, aesthetically speaking personality. And we're bringing all the agenda of progressism to the city council. Who's talking about LGBT rights, sustainability, the quality, the air pollution.
Sure.
Also speaking about a new approach to the cohabitation problematics in soccer as a space for people to meet.
Sure.
And in general, sports also like a way of generating more cohabitation and more convivencia, we call it.
Sure.
So yeah, I work with this city councilman, and also I work as a professor at the University of Antioquia, which is the biggest public university here in Medellin.
I didn't know that you worked as a professor. That's cool.
Yeah, actually, these days we've been in strike. This is like the 4th or 5th week with a very irregular strike, because there's this huge problem for the budget for education in the national government. So the universities are not, they don't have enough resources to even finish this year.
In all of these episodes, I try to dig into some of the other deeper issues that are affecting Colombia from the standpoint of things that I discovered about Colombia with interviewing Popeye and this whole project. One of the big ones being Colombian superpowers. This idea that Colombians have this ability to forget. There's a lot to think about there when first I wanted to ask you, because any Colombian that I've mentioned this to, they all kind of had the same reaction. They kind of laugh at first, but then ultimately some of them have said to me, it's very sad that we do that. And they've all tended to agree with it. I don't know. What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I've heard that from the point of view of some evolutionists, the capacity to forget is part of that of the things that we are learning. I mean, it's part of the things that makes us evolve. So I think that's like trying to see the glass half full. But I think that for the context in which we are speaking about forgetting, it's definitely very sad. One of the main things that we need to deal with nowadays, having a so deep and long history of violence, is memory, because we don't want to repeat what we have lived already. That's kind of a cliche, I know, but the thing is that memory is not like a monolithic thing. It's not like a single thread of happenings, of successes. Memory is a more complex thing. I mean, you mentioned it before when you were saying about how you are getting more aware of the history of Colombia. So I think that in this case, that's very sad, because we need to comprehend, we need to understand that every single memory, every single story that is related to the conflict needs to be documented and needs to be heard. But if we don't remember, if we don't document and share, and if we don't construct the memory as a way of also giving some release and some peace for the people who have lived the conflict in the most shocking and close ways, we will not leave this part of the story behind. And I don't mean that we need to leave it behind like passing the sheet of a book. And I mean that if we don't fully or try to fully understand the complexity of those memories, we will get stuck in that part of the story. And that's, I think, what we are living now from the macro politic point of view.
I wanted to talk for a second, because one of the people that's really fascinating to me is the mayor of Medellin. And I mean, look, this is a weird thing. As I've learned, this is one of those things, if you say to a Colombian, you're never going to get an answer that you expect. Like I from a distance, as an innocent bystander in this, well, I shouldn't say innocent bystander, but as a trying to be objective party, he seems like a really good guy to me. He seems like, I follow him on Twitter. I follow the news with him. And I like a lot of the things that I see him doing, but of course I don't live there. I'm sure there's another dimension to this. But the mayor, I look at as somebody who's really trying to change Medellin for the better. He seems to be somebody who's really trying to make a difference and make it better, and who's fighting this image that is a big problem for the city. my question is, what's the perception of him there? I mean, is it what I see on the internet and what I see in press and stuff like that? I mean, is the support for him there? Is the city behind this guy?
It's a very good question, because I think that Medellin has a particular way of behaving as a whole in terms of public opinion, because it's very particular. Than when you see this study that says that the mayor has like the most the biggest acceptance in the country, which means that he's the most popular mayor. So first you see that thing and you say, okay, that's one data, but then you see how people in that very study responded to the question about how is the city being administrated, and there's a huge difference. There's a difference of more than 20 percentage points. So that's something that's been happening here for a long time, and it's the thing that people tend to be more naive, I think, more permissive, I think, with the mayor. More, I think that people qualifies the mayor as if he or she was the image of the city, of like a symbol. So I think that when we read those numbers, we have to be very critical, because it's not that easy, because every mayor in Medellin has been the most popular in the country, even the last ones, which they could have been better. So that's one thing. I don't think that in one hand he's as popular as the studies say, but in the other hand, I also think that he has been very, very, very keen, very intelligent, and in the way he positions himself through a narrative. And this is and that's the thing that I think kind of is related to the topic of narco culture and Popeye in this case. So I think that the thing is the narratives. Who is getting stronger with the narratives that this mayor is using to position himself? He's positioning himself as a good cop. He's positioning himself as the first cop of the city, as the vigilante who is not getting weak with these big mafia guys. And that narrative is efficient as we can see from the public opinion point of view. But from my point of view, that narrative is reinforcing the same part of the story that we are trying to leave behind. Because if we keep thinking about good guys and bad guys, like you said before, that's a very easy way of seeing the world. And I mean, there are more nuances. It's more nuanced than just saying good or bad. But I also think that we have to be very aware of those nuances, but trying not to be naive, because I agree with you in the fact that, yes, we should think about the other side of the stories, but we need to be very careful, because by acknowledging those nuances, you can, through a narrative, position a person as Popeye, being a new vigilante, being a new hero. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, those nuances are there, but still we need to be very strong in the sense that what's the narrative that we need to position in the city? I think I think that it's a different narrative than the one that the city mayor is positioning.
You just broke through exactly the point that I was getting to, which is what emerged out of this entire process for me. And I think it's a heavy theme in the podcast, is this whole thing, bigger than the actual crimes of Popeye and all that stuff, and the case of him, bigger than that it's the battle for the narrative. And I said that right from the get-go in the trailer to this podcast. I said it's what became very clear to me. And, but it's interesting what you just said about by taking the position he's taking, he's actually enforcing that narrative in a weird way. And I think you're right about that. It's an interesting thing.
Because can I say something?
Please.
Because I think that somehow what happens here is that, I don't know if we can blame it on Trump. I don't think he's the first one doing it, but for sure he's the one that has got away with the biggest win from this narrative. And it's that if we keep accepting people saying intolerant things, using our argument of tolerance to not be tolerant, I think that's a trap. When we fell. We fell in that trap, and they're winning in the United States, like getting the narratives and the discussions to the extremes. And when the streams are strong, the most sensate, the most intermediate and conciliatory positions are being just ignored. So that's the danger of that narrative. Like if we think that's about the good guys and the bad guys, those that are able to see the nuances and maybe look beyond and find more clever responses are just not being heard.
It is a very alarming changing in society. It's not just Colombia. That's like you said. It's here too. It's especially here, and we're seeing it everywhere. And it's people using this for they're hijacking this thing for their own purpose. It's very scary. It's and as the norm changes and it becomes more acceptable, is the real danger, in my opinion.
We are committing the same mistake, and it's paying attention to the extreme narratives. We're still getting and taking decisions from those perspectives, and I think that's the mistake. I don't know if you're aware of this other case in which there was I don't know the names, but there was this guy, a journalist, who invited a very polemic right-wing guy to speak about something in a public event, a university public event, and he after being bullied all around the social media for bringing this hated guy, he decided just not to interview him anymore. And I think that's also a mistake. But the thing is that they decided to just not making this panel and just not considering that discussion. And I think that's the mistake. That's the mistake when you just, even in this case in which he was trying to reveal his, the problems in his narrative. The extreme people from the other side just thought that the correct thing to do was to not listen them. So again, I think that we need to decide better who is holding the narratives, who is leading the narratives, because if we keep leaving that power to those who have the most extreme positions, those are the ones that are going to keep winning. And it's like a bouncing game. If people doesn't like the thing that one guy say, they go to the other extreme position. Even though I don't think that we have to see the world in a dichotomic way. I mean, just like good, bad, up, down, and yeah, you know what I'm saying, left, right. But I would say that we can see how the right is being more concrete, is being more clear with their narrative. They are just focusing on security. They are focusing on fear. They're focusing on generating fear. And fear moves people to action, not just to the thought. There's a neuroscientist who says that the reasons takes us to the conclusions. Instead, the emotions takes us to the actions. So I think that the right is doing it right. they are just focusing on how to generate fear, and by fear mobilizing people. Instead, we from the most left part of the thought are having so many causes, so many things to worry about, that what it's maybe going on in the States, in Colombia, in Brazil, in general, is that people just go with the ones that has a more clear narrative. And maybe we need to identify a more abstract idea that could fight fear, and that's very difficult.
Now, let me change the subject for a second, because you led me to something else. In the process of following this story, if you will, and how it relates to Colombia and all these other issues, one of the things that struck me as very odd, and it goes back to this idea of this Colombian superpower that that my friend Esteban coined. But in the course of doing this, one of the things that happened beginning around March, I think, in following through the scope of this story of Popeye, was he was ranting a lot on Twitter about the presidential election. Now, again, this is March of 2018, so the presidential election hadn't happened, and there was one guy in particular which he really was going on and on about. And I didn't know who he was before I did this, and so I had to do some research, and a guy called Timochenko. And, I'm just, now, I hope I don't say anything. Well, anyway, I'm just going to say it. I don't know enough about the FARC and all this, but I do know this, that it is a fact that they have kidnapped a lot of people. It is a fact that they have their narco trafficking their operation is quite expansive and big, and that they have killed a lot of people. And there's this. I mean, you can't ignore that, I think. And I'm not trying to get political about if they're right or wrong or anything like that. I'm just looking at it from that point of view. But the thing that struck me as ironic is that, you have this guy, Popeye, who's, been a member of the Medellin cartel. He's killed all these people. He's a very controversial figure in Medellin. And he's this guy who's, so many people look at, and he's yelling and this and that. And I have to say, when he started tweeting about this, there was a part of me that goes, boy, this is really ironic. It's ironic because, as crazy as the things that Popeye says, it's also, it's hard to not look at this and go, there is something to be said about the fact that you have a guy who was, and I know he dropped out, but a guy who at the time was running for president, who's maybe done worse crimes than Popeye. It's like, that was really hard to get my head around. What could you explain? I mean, do people in Colombia look at this? I don't know.
If we think that those two guys are the ones who need to be listened, that's the mistake, because we're listening to the two extremes. We don't know if who of those two guys is worse. We know that those two guys are bad, but again, the problem is that why are we listening to them, right? Like, still the same that I said before. We're looking at the two extremes of a discussion, and we are not going to find any construction of sense in that discussion. I mean, if they are, I mean, we also have an expression, it's conchudo. What I mean is that Popeye shouldn't be talking about someone else's crimes when he has all that pain behind. I mean, yeah, does he have blood in the face to say those things without blushing, or what? But yes, I mean, if you think that just considering Tymoshenko's opinion or just taking Popaye's opinion in consideration, I think that maybe that it's putting you in one of those sides. And I think that we need different voices, different, maybe not maybe also for different narratives and also different leaders of those narratives. Because if we have to decide between Tymoshenko and Popaye, I mean, we'd rather kill ourselves. I mean, what to do?
You know, the interesting thing is, this brings up another point, which is, I think one of the problems, and this I don't know, I'm not, an expert, but because you have this staggering disparity between rich and poor in Colombia, and as I've learned, it's like the biggest in Latin America, is the largest disparity between rich and poor. Is
the Gini score.
You're talking about, generally, when you have this kind of poverty, a lot of people that don't have the access to education, aren't educated. And so when you're dealing with that compounds the problem to, it makes these people, it makes a giant portion of the population susceptible to this idea that they're, susceptible to one or the other, one of these extremes. And it really is dividing. That's the purpose of in fact both of these guys. It's just
definitely.
I wanted to ask you, because in going deeper and deeper into this about Colombia, one of the things that I haven't fully made this conclusion yet, but I really kind of got to this place where I think this is my position on this, at least, is that, Colombia has always known two things: violence, insecurity, and poverty. And I think if you really take a step back on a kind of macro level, I think that guys like Popaye, even guys like Pablo Escobar, okay, and the FARC and the paramilitaries, it's, in a weird way, they're just symptoms rather than the actual problem. And the problem, as I started to try to understand this, goes back way before them, to when Colombia was colonized by Spain, and the kind of systems and mechanisms that were put in place by the Spanish. And I'm not trying to blame the Spanish for everything, but but those things, the system from the get-go, from the beginning, was so inappropriately imbalanced that it just created the foundation for something that is so inherently problematic that, like I said, that as a result, like these things, like the narco traffickers, the crime, all of it, it's a symptom of the problem rather than the actual problem itself.
I think we're kind of trapped in a Groundhog Day. So I feel like we're trapped in that movie because we're seeing every day the same dichotomy, the same narrative, the same supposed opposition that you mentioned we have been dealing with since the colony, and maybe keeping that dichotomy is what makes us keep electing the same guys, because in that dichotomy, having a so strong story with violence from the left wing, it's very difficult to reverse it. And that's why I think we need to change the dichotomy. We need to identify a different communal and a different common ground to fight fear. And I don't know where could that be.
I interviewed these three young women from IAFIT who were very, very bright, very intelligent. One of them, I interviewed with her and her husband, who was helping translate. I asked her the question: do you look at Pablo Escobar the same way you look at Osama bin Laden? just to lay it out historically, I mean, I think Pablo's responsible for more deaths, certainly. I mean,
absolutely.
Way more. And the similarity, if you look, they both had a group of young men around them who were willing to kill themselves for the cause or whatever. They looked at him like a cult leader. Same with Pablo. There's a similarity in these guys that is, I mean, I drew a lot of parallels. And perhaps there is a narrative out there that's I mean, Osama is the ultimate evil, and that somehow or another, because Pablo, a lot of people will say, well, he did good things. He did some good things or whatever. Is it because of that he's not going to get put in the same category?
Well, it's. I said before that comparisons are good because they help us, generate knowledge. But I think that when we compare, we need to see the similarities, but also the differences. A good comparison also considers the differences, because there's a saying that we have, which is something like the devil is in the details. So if we just consider the similarities, maybe we are being biased, right? If we're trying to make them look similar, what's the scope of it? What's the objective to make them look similar? And also the same, if we are just focusing on the differences, what is our scope in just seeing that part of the picture? So I think that the comparison is delicate, of course, but I get your point. I mean, I would say that they are similar, but they are also, I mean, they're different, but in terms of the historic impact for further generations, they are kind of similar too, I guess.
When the U.S. military killed Osama bin Laden, so they brought his body onto this aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean. They had, after they did all the stuff, the photographs and the things they had to take, they had I believe they had a Muslim cleric on board who performed like the rites for a funeral. What they did was they buried his body at sea. In doing that, they avoided wanting to create a place like a shrine, or they could become. Whereas it's the one thing in Medellin, which is they didn't do that with Pablo. And you have these, you have his grave, his tomb, you have the Monaco, you have a lot of the places that are in effect shrines. I know one of the things that the mayor, Federico Gutierrez, the mayor of Medellin, is thinking about doing is he wants to dismantle and destroy, for example, some of the narco landmarks in the city, and one of them being the Monaco building. What do you think about this?
If the scope of it is to reconstruct those memories, to put the focus on the victims and their needs, which are truth, justice, reparation, if that's the focus of the intervention, I think it's okay. But if the focus is trying to clean out the image, trying to cover that part of the story because it's a shame for us and our visitors shouldn't see that part of it, I think that's not just incorrect but also stupid, because they are going to find those narratives anyway. So wouldn't it be better if we say what we want to say about those times? Wouldn't it be better if we instead of cleaning those landmarks from the city, just convert them into memory spaces to transform the realities that we know are the basis of those problems? As I said before, I'm not sure because I don't know the project in detail, but that's my position about it.
I don't know if you're aware of this. In Singapore, I want to say it was like in April or March this past year, a restaurant opened called Escobar's. And on the menu, it says, at the top of the menu, it says, Plata o Plomo, join our cartel. And the imagery in the restaurant is, well, the menu has the classic kind of silhouette of Pablo Escobar. I mean, it's him. It's unmistakable. And in the restaurant, There was actually a giant mural on the wall featuring what was like sort of the Last Supper, but instead of Jesus, in the seat where Jesus sat in the middle was Pablo. The Colombian government filed a complaint to the government of Singapore that this is just crossing a line and it's just too offensive. Now, the restaurant's still open. The owner claims that the only reason it's called that is he's not trying to offend anybody, but the only reason it's called that is because it had the word bar in it. And that's why he chose the name Escobar. In Vancouver, British Columbia, there was another place that opened up called Escobar in Slovenia. Okay? It's a tiny little country in Europe. They opened a hamburger restaurant based on Pablo Escobar. To me, this is a very dangerous thing.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you hear about this, does it make it feel like, the other narrative is really winning?
I think it. I mean, you can also see places like those, and even more, let's say, more naive.
Yeah.
Even here, I mean, you can see many people with a kind of altar to Pablo.
Yeah.
So, what I think that is the mistake is attacking, is forbidding, is neglecting, is violenting. I think it happens. It happens. The thing that people construct a brand around this idea that for many people like me is delicate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what should we do with that? What we regularly do is to neglect it, attack it, try to make it disappear, which is part of the same narrative. Is part of we're falling in the trap. But if instead of doing that, we were generating a reflection, if there were a cultural movement in, what were the countries you say? Slovenia,
Singapore, Slovenia.
Singapore. I mean, if there were in Canada, if there were at least a little bit of a critical action, a more educational action too, a more reflective action, I think that people themselves could just start taking their decisions. I don't think that a bar called that way should disappear. I think that I wouldn't go and visit it. Actually, if I live there, I could also be very against it, but in a different way. I think it's possible to generate changes with a different methodology, with a different approach. And that approach is the approach of trying to understand, but acknowledging that the symbols we use have a strong power. And if we don't consider the negative externalities of that power, we will be harming people without knowing it. And that's what happens with this kind of things.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Seriously, it helps. I hate bothering everybody for this, but I gotta do it. Please visit our website for a full list of credits and some cool bonus materials, like photos, videos, and declassified documents at thesicarioeffect.com. If you're not sure how to spell it, it's the name of the podcast. Or you can follow us on Instagram at The Sicario Effect, or on Twitter at Sicario Effect. There is no the in the handle. And on Facebook at Exclave Media. I'm Jonathan Branstein, your host and writer. The show is produced by me, Caitlin Tyrrell, Ernie Hurtado, and Matt Olson. Our editor is William Broughton. Our engineer, sound design, and mix, Ernie Hurtado. Co-producer, Esteban Orozco. Music composed by Preston Nowakowski. Artwork, Juan Felipe Orozco. Additional music is composed by William Broughton. Interview translator, Alejandro Caseño. Additional translation, Juliet Restrepo, Christina Madrid. Production support was provided by Daniel Urria. Special thanks to Laura Kate Jones, Mauricio Builes, Alejandro Brugas, Alejandro Doring, Alexandra Doring, Tim Fufus, Tom Freston, Ross Bernard, Kelvin Wells II, Saad Mohseni, Yoshi Obayashi, Jeff Frankel, Stephen Molina, and the fabulous Los Hermanos Orozco. Additional thanks to the Museo Casa de la Memoria in Medellin, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum, Michael Pinckney, Mary Finch, IAFIT Medellin, Luisa Garces. Also, please visit the Narco Tour project at narcotour.co. That's narcotour.co. This podcast is dedicated to the memory of Guillermo Cano, Anthony Bourdain, and Larry Bresner.